You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now we're getting into the first topic for our conversation this morning, which again is a look at the presidential directives on palliatives. And this is in response to the removal of subsidy. Now you'll recall that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu had assured Nigerians that palliatives would be in place in order to relieve the impact of the removal on Nigerians.
Indeed, Kingsley, the president has engaged various stakeholders in fashioning out programs and interventions for reducing the pains of fuel subsidy removal on Nigerians. Apart from engaging the labor, he has also directed that other measures be fashioned out.
With us in the studios now to discuss this subject matter further, I would like to welcome John Owajumogu, who is the Presidential Advisor, Industry, Trade and Investment. Mr. Owajumogu, we're glad to have you on the program this morning.
Pleasure. Glad to be here.
Also here with us in the studios is Doris Anite. She's a member of the Presidential Action Committee. We're glad to also have you join us for the program today.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so let's begin with the advisor on industry, trade, and investment. One of the issues out there in the public domain has to do with the initial announcement relating to 8,000 naira monthly for a period of half a year for 12 million households throughout the country. Now, that's been suspended in the meantime, with the president directing a review of that amount on account of the reactions from a broad spectrum of Nigerians. There are also other matters around it. What is it that Nigerians should know about what is in the basket for palliatives against what's happening with respect to the removal of fuel subsidy?
Thank you very much. And first of all, we have to acknowledge that the removal of the subsidy has found wide acceptance. And His Excellency President Tinubu understands that while the long-run effects of this subsidy removal is beneficial to the economy and to everyone, however, it is also understood that it has some inflationary pressures that it adds on the cost of living and the cost of goods and services. And in that way, and particularly for our most vulnerable citizens, it drives up the cost of basic amenities, food especially. Now, in recognizing that, there are a number of policy options that one would have to consider to be able to alleviate the impact of the subsidy removal, particularly, again, on our most vulnerable. And a cash transfer, it's one option. But however, if, as a lot of us know, there's a popular saying, the road to hell is littered with good intentions. So one has to make sure that policy options that are being considered do not result in outcomes that are unintended. So as a result of that, His Excellency has asked for this review so that we can very thoroughly and comprehensively look at the various tools within our disposal that can add the most immediate and impactful effect on our citizenry, that can reduce the cost of food, that can reduce the cost of transportation, and can reduce the cost of those variables that they deal with immediately. To start with another quote, a famous economist said, in the long run, we are all dead. So we have to look at options that provides relief now, options that puts us in a better position for later, and then for beyond. So we have to dimension it in those three phases. And that's why the presidency has called for that review.
Okay, thank you, John, for your opening comment there. You've touched on some issues and you talked about immediate interventions. Let's bring in Doris Anite now, who is the member Presidential Action Committee, into the conversation. He has talked about interventions. Now, what are the immediate interventions that the government is looking at now?
Okay, so I think there are two ways to the government when considering the removal of fuel subsidy. We're looking at two ways. One was with engagement with the organized labor sector, which we saw. But prior to that, there was already a plan of action that would cushion the economy when the subsidy was removed. So during the labor discussions and interactions, there were a number of discussions, and I would say requests from labor. That was on one side. But for the government itself, the subsidy removal is actually part of the economic plan. So there's actually a whole ground economic plan that was put down to cushion, or more like support, the recovery of the economy. So in the immediate term, to support or to cushion or alleviate the effect of the subsidy removal, what the government was looking at first was the cash transfer, which is now being put on hold, according to what John had said. And the second was to support food, food availability, making sure that the poor and vulnerable households, including, and that's most Nigerians, have access or have food made available to them. And also distribution of fertilizers to farmers who are currently farming. Now, the whole idea of looking at around the food security area is to ensure that we have sustainability, and we also have managed pricing. Now, if with what we've seen, food prices skyrocketing for any number of reasons, some of them usually due to uncertainty, when the government steps in to intervene, it gives that confidence to the farmers that there is support from the government. And that's the pronouncement that the president made through his special advisor on the 13th of July, when he declared the state of emergency on the food and livestock sector, where we are actually basically looking at food security, food prices, and food sustainability. And it's the whole value chain of agriculture and livestock to ensure that that area is revamped as quickly as possible. And we've already set in the motion to make that happen, with the distribution of 50 million bags of fertilizers to farmers, and then distribution of grains, rice, maize, and any other grain we can find. At the moment, we have some scarcity in the market, so we are seeing food prices go up. But we know that we've also gone around within the strategic reserves. We have maize stock and rice stock that we're releasing to farmers as early as next week.
Sorry, I would like you to clarify that last statement before I get into other question. You went to the strategic reserves and you find rice and maize stock that you are releasing to farmers. Do farmers
to households?
All right, to households.
Yeah,
because what the experts have advised, following our number of conversations, is that what farmers need are seeds and seedlings, approved seeds and seedlings,
and not grains.
And not grains.
So that's
they consume their grains, and then the next season they are hungry.
So that was the question was immediate plan. So that's immediate. Now in the medium plan, I mean, there's a whole lot of, you're looking at the agricultural sector is one, SME stimulation is another one, provision of housing, provision of social investment schemes around education and health, ensuring or improving access to funding for CNG, for transportation, rail. All of those are part of the medium and long-term plan. But in the immediate, it's actually the release of the food grains from the market and fertilizer stock that we have to the farmers and to the households. Now, going forward, even in the agricultural value chain, there are still timelines for implementation of different initiatives within the sector. In the immediate, I said it was released, and in the medium term, now we've gone far into the planting season, in the rainy season. So this is not really the time to release seedlings. So we've started engaging. If you look at the templates that was read out during the emergency, yes. One of them was to support farming, and that would be both mechanization, land clearing, release of seedlings, engaging with the food research institutes to ensure that even the quality of grains, seedlings that we have are the high yielding ones. And once those ones are done, we're engaging with the Seed Council of Nigeria to ensure that we have adequate storage of, adequate supply of high quality seedlings. And we've identified, the area of immediate support. One, so you have the cash crops, which are there for export stimulation, and then you have the food crops. And food is an emergency, so the government is procuring seedlings to ensure that during the next farming season, we'll have that distributed to the farmers.
All right, thank you very much, Doris Onite. Let's bring in again John Owajumogu. One issue that has come up with respect to the poorest of the poor households, 12 million of them. The issue has to do with how do you identify these 12 million poorest of the poor households?
Well, there's been ultimately, one has to acknowledge that data quality is generally poor in Nigeria. However, there's been a lot of work that's been done in the past that can help identify these vulnerable citizens using different economic data and indicators to be able to identify them. And there's been a lot of work that's been done over the last couple of years to try to apply unique identifiers to some of our citizenry. There's been a social register that's been developed over years. There's been a lot of social work that has gone on over years. So you have all this available information that would have to be triangulated together to identify the people that fall within the band of the sort of interventions that we are looking at. So whether it's looking at people through NINs, looking at people through the ones that may have bank accounts and BVNs, looking at people who have been captured in various social registers as part of different humanitarian work that's been done over the years. So that's the work that is being done to make sure that those ones who need those specific type of interventions are identified. There's not going to be any perfect process. However, you want to make sure that whoever is getting the intended palliative, to use that word, is the right person that is not being distributed to people who do not fall within that vulnerable group. So, so the work is looking at what we already have is the first step. Collating that information together, going through a diagnostic process, and all that stuff has happened over the last couple of months and continues to happen on. And then it's an ongoing process. It's not something that will ever get complete, so that you make sure the net is as wide as possible so that most of our citizens can be captured.
I asked that question advisedly because we've had conversations around these issues on Good Morning Nigeria. And perhaps you let us know, and our viewers invariably, what the intended outcomes are after these households receive these monies for the duration that they are intended to receive the monies for. And that is because previous work that was done by the preceding administration generated a register. Let's assume, for purposes of labeling, a register of the poor. Are we going to have to go back to that same register and begin to get identifiers of the poor who are still poor after the raft of measures taken under the SIP, intended to also lift them out of poverty? So what is it that will be done differently at this time so that there is no presumption of entrenchment of poverty?
Yes, and that's a very good question. Well, so at the end of the day, what is this all about? And one key measure is, if you were on the register at the start of this program, given a certain timeline, 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, how much have we moved? How many of those people's register have we moved out of poverty? I mean, there's a key statistic that's always set out there, how China has moved, 500 million people out of poverty. That's the same kind of statistic that we're coming out of. People who are in the social register should not be in the social register after a defined time period. So that's a key outcome that we are going after. And part of it also is accountability that you put into the system. Because no matter what, there are no perfect plans. No matter what plan or what policy you put in place, if you do not put accountability measures, of which a KPI, such as how many people have left that register, it is something that then it's, as they say, inshallah vibes, right? So the focus of His Excellency President Tinubu is that we have tangible outcomes out of the execution of these programs. And in order to do that, as a monitoring and evaluation team, as part of the broader team that's working on this, that will be looking at specific KPIs and whether we are achieving it at the time that was set, so that we don't fall into the mistakes of the past. What has happened in the past has happened in the past, but here we are motivated to drive most Nigerians to not be in this condition that we find ourselves in. And to what Dr. Doris said earlier, the plan is a comprehensive plan. We are starting with immediate food relief, and then we're going to get into putting interventions that will enhance the capacity of Nigerians to start producing food, to what she said, inputs and extension services and ability to people to start moving up the food value chain. We want to get to a point where our share of the value contribution within the food value chain is much higher than what it is now. We go above subsistence farming, we go above exports of raw agricultural products to value add, to where we are now we're food sufficient, and to the point where we begin to export. But you have to start from the basics and set the foundation right. And that is the step now, but there are other steps as part of the complementary steps that are part of the program.
Okay, Dr. Doris, you talked about talks with the labor union, and one thing I would love to understand is, yes, we have a listening precedent, because when the palliatives were rolled out, there was a lot of uproar across the country. How can 8,000 naira be enough? I would like to understand, 8,000 in a household of 12. In a household of 12, is 8,000 just for one person or for the whole of the households? Each of them getting 8,000 naira, or is it just the breadwinner that gets the 8,000 naira alone?
Okay, so the 8,000...
Can you break it down for us to understand?
Actually, we heard about 8,000 and 12 million households from the social media.
Okay. It wasn't confirmed?
No, it's not confirmed. We're still reviewing the process.
Okay.
Like John mentioned.
Okay.
So I don't know where 8,000 came from, and no.
Okay. No, but I mean, the information was out there for a while.
Yes.
And when the president then said, look, review, the president wasn't saying review ex nihilo. The president was saying we are reviewing because of the feedback from members of the public saying 8,000 will be inadequate. But I think, just to contribute to the question raised by my colleague, I was chuckling when she said a household of 12 members. That's a football team and one reserve.
Exactly.
A football team and one reserve.
Yeah.
But that's a bit excessive. But the whole idea is 12 million households getting the 8,000 naira, not each of them getting 8,000 naira. But the point also, I recall we were having an interaction on this, was it yesterday or the day before in our super review segment. Again, you can also clarify this for us. There is no presumption in rolling out the conditional cash transfer that each of these, shall we say with the greatest respect to them, poor households are starting off at zero income level. In other words, the 8,000, assuming we say it's 8,000 still, is supposed to be supplemental to whatever they are already earning. What they are earning is low, but it's not as if they are earning zero. So you said they are using the Jumai's example, 12 members. You just sit at home like this, you are waiting for 8,000 naira. I mean, so Doris, clarify this again for our viewers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay, so when I said that we are not aware of the 8,000 and the 12 million, it is true. The presidency set up a presidential council on subsidy removal. One of the subcommittees is the cash transfer subcommittee, and I'm a member of that subcommittee. There is no statement or release that has come from that subcommittee, and the Labour is part of it. We have the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Ministry of Finance. It's actually a whole broad group of members that are members of that subcommittee. We haven't come up with any pronouncement to say this is what we're doing. So that 8,000, like I said, was flying around for whatever reason. Maybe somebody in some discussion had it. So if the Presidential Council on Subsidy Removal hasn't made a statement, then it cannot be valid, because we will still be the ones to implement it.
Okay.
Yes.
What is the subcommittee looking at? What do you have in mind in terms of the conditional cash transfer?
Some I may be able to disclose now, but the others were still being reviewed because of how sensitive this matter is. I do not have the authority yet to say, because it's still a whole lot of databases that we're looking at to see where we can actually identify the target group until that is done and finalized. And then let me also mention that we are working with the World Bank, who is actually like the supervisory organization reviewing the process that will eventually take place when we finalize. The loan or the facility is actually coming from the World Bank, and they are very particular about how that fund is utilized and who the target beneficiaries would be. So until that is done, we will come back and explain the release or explain to Nigerians.
What is the takeoff time for this, and therefore what are the other timelines that might be embedded in the, let's say, aspect of conditional cash transfer? Because those who are impacted by the removal of fuel subsidy, they are already, like the rest of us, some of us who would need palliative, we're already impacted.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, you're right. So yeah, one of the subgroups we're looking at are the very poor households. That's one subgroup. But if you agree with me, there are lots of people who have touch points with petrol, and the low-income workers, for example, the traders, the students, a whole lot of people have been impacted. So when we started, I mean, the register, the social register that John alluded to, just had poor, vulnerable house and few members of the micro enterprise traders associations and all of that, without the inclusion of the low-income federal and state workers. Now we have to look for that database to include. We have to look at it. That's why I say it's a very broad spectrum that we're looking at, not just one database that we already have. So we cannot use the existing database we have alone. I mean, sorry, the existing social register alone. We had to expand it to bring in other, other citizens who are also impacted by this subsidy removal.
No, my question is, I don't know whether John will come in here. What are the timelines for this efforts?
Okay, so yeah, let me answer to that. Now, because we are expanding the database, it's taking us longer. We thought it was going to be a short sprint. I mean, quickly, within a week of that subsidy removal, we would have come back. But then data cleaning, data identification, and then eventual management, even waiting for the NAS to get the approval for even to borrow the funds from the World Bank, all of that has delayed the process. So
Kingsley talked about the data, the registry for, from the previous administration. Do we still need data again for?
Yeah, so there's a lot of data in Nigeria actually, everywhere.
Of the poor, the vulnerable we have.
Yeah, but it's not just, I mean, when you say vulnerable, who again? Who are we looking at? The database we have at the moment, the social register that we have at the moment with NASCO, pull that data mostly from poor households in rural communities using a set of criteria. So they come to your village, they come to those areas and identify, using their criteria, who is the poor household. Maybe you're living in a thatched roof. Maybe you're sick and old and you can't move around. Or maybe you're disabled. And a number of criteria that actually targeted the lowest of the low. Now, you're now scaling up because you're talking about first subsidy removal. You're going to be talking about looking at those who actually use petrol. A lot of those in rural communities do not use petrol to go to work every day. It is the workers who go to work every day that use petrol, like us, that use petrol every day. And these are the people we have to target. And then in that group of people that use petrol every day, you can also segment it. So you still have the low income, medium income, and then the high income. Now,
tell our viewers something, so that I know, as you acknowledge, that this isn't a sprint, and when you have the implications of a policy all around us, government has a duty to say, look, how do we respond? But there is a presumption again that there were handover notes from the preceding administration, which means that some work had been done in some of these respects. How much benefit is the previous work to the current efforts? To say, all right, this is what we're going to do, assuming the previous administration had removed fuel subsidy in December of 2022. It would have had to manage the consequences of the fuel subsidy removal. What kind of work, or what did you inherit in terms of advisories, in terms of paperwork? We know that there is the SIP, that is the Social Investment Program. It has legal backing now, and so on and so forth. Isn't there some work that they have done that could fast track part of what you are doing? Instead of, I don't know, I'm not saying that, but looking like you're starting from point origin all over again.
John.
Well,
Or John or Doris, either of you can take it. Yes.
Well, yes, I'll start and Dr. Doris can add. I mean, the reality is, yes, of course, there are handover notes, and we're leveraging the work that's been done previously. But in everything, the ownership and the accountability remains with this administration. And it would also have to do its own due diligence to ensure that the data is accurate, to ensure that some of the plans and interventions that were designed is appropriate for the situation that we find ourselves in, to what Dr. Doris, the detailed explanation she gave. You have to also consider some of the peculiarities that are involved when you're looking at the different segments of society and the different social strata. The previous administration or previous plans, given at the time they were made, may not have those things in view. So we're in a situation where the subsidy removal is not an abstract concept, it's an actual concept. And the implied or expected implications of it is now manifesting, and sometimes manifest differently from how it was considered. So you have to fine-tune your plan, or any plan that was previously inherited, to ensure that it fits the situation that you find yourself, because you want to get this thing right. So we are not starting from scratch. We're starting from work that has been done and then building upon it. But there are still issues that you have to deal with either way, irrespective of the work that was done previously. And then remember that we also have two issues. It's not only the subsidy removal, we also have the floating of the naira. Two very good macro decisions that were made, but also have inflationary impact that we'll have to consider as well, in terms of their impact on food and how the inflationary pressures that comes from it. So those plans we have to consider. The plans that we're doing, we have to consider that we have the right measures to address the fallout of these decisions that were made.
Okay, like Dr. Doris said, the 8,000 palliative was on the social media and all that, and now the president has said you should go back to the drawing table to, to reconsider some things. What will be the outcome?
Well, the outcome is that, and I think Dr. Doris has already talked about it, is that one, we need to make sure we are identifying different solutions to different problems, to address different problems. One, there's the problem of people who need food, they need to eat, right? There are people who need transport, who their major issue, transport. It's because of they go to work every day, they use petrol, they use diesel. So we have to address those problems. There are people who we need to increase our food productivity, for example. Because the reality is that if you address some of the supply chain constraints that we have, anytime there are any external shock beyond now, we will have the capacity and the resilience to be able to respond. So we have to put that in mind as well as we address the more immediate problems that we're dealing with now. Because you don't want 6 months from now, there's another global shock, and then we are scrambling. We want 6 months, 1 year from now, whatever is happening in the global economy. I mean, nobody anticipated COVID. Nobody anticipated the Russia-Ukraine war and the impact that it's having on food. I mean, with the Russia exiting from the grain deal, for example, it's going to have, as we see, food prices are already rising. So we want to get to that point where, irrespective of what's happening in the broader economy, that we've built a resilient and robust food value chain. So that has to be considered in what we're doing as well. So the outcome is that all of these things enables us to have have food sovereignty for our citizens, one, and then be able to increase our food
factor,
productivity.
we have climate change too.
We have climate change that we have to consider. So as we feed our people, as we develop, we have to develop in a very sustainable manner. Because the reality is that despite, I think in Africa as a whole, contributes like 2 or 3% to global emissions. Nigeria contributes maybe less than 1%, right? But the impact of climate change, the negative impact, I'm not sure if there's a positive impact, but the negative impact of climate change impacts us much more than the countries that pollute more. So as we...
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry because we're getting pressed for time. We have 2 topics to discuss. The other is also economic. I just want to bring in again, Doris, into the conversation because you are meeting, and the federal government does not have citizens, as it were, of its own. But those whom you are targeting reside in local government areas, reside in communities, and reside in states, and of course the federal capital territory. How much interaction is your subcommittee or the council having with the subnational entities on the broad areas of intervention and contribution to what needs to be done?
Yeah, you're right. The economy of Nigeria is actually at the subnationals. So the governors have actually been incredibly supportive. We meet on a daily and weekly basis. I mean, there's a subgroup, also a subcommittee from both the NEC and the NGF who actually interface and interact with us on a weekly basis. They're very concerned. And even to show support, some states have already started implementing their own palliatives and rolling out programs to support their own citizens to cushion the effect of the subsidy removal. And then working collaboratively with the federal government, all of these initiatives that we're identifying will be implemented by the state government. For example, even the fertilizer distribution and even the grain distribution will be handled by the state government. The federal government makes it available to the states to distribute to their citizens because they know who their citizens are. They know those who are vulnerable, they know those who actually need it the most. So we cannot work without collaborating with the state government. And it's actually been a topical issue since the removal of the double subsidies, the FX subsidy and the petrol subsidies. They have actually been really supportive and just waiting for the federal government to roll. And they pick up the baton, and then they're actually the last mile.
Yeah, indeed, yes.
She said double subsidy. I like that. Subsidy on FX, subsidy on petrol. Yesterday I said there was another subsidy. That subsidy has not been touched.
Which is that?
It's subsidy on security for VIPs.
That's another topic.
It's another topic, but it's a subsidy. It's a subsidy. When you say that policemen who are recruited, trained, equipped, and maintained to be protecting only VIPs, and you say, look, these larger citizens don't have greater protection. So it's a subsidy for them. If you were to recruit, train, equip, and maintain your own private security guard, it would be costly.
Yes.
So now, I don't know how many Mopo you have. I want
Easily. Well, you people are just starting, and we wish you all the best as you go. It's going to be a long journey, actually, but Nigerians are looking up to you. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. John Nwajumogu, Presidential Advisor, Industry, Trade and Investment. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Dr. Doris Anite, Member, Presidential Action Committee. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
We'll take a break now. When we return, our second topic will begin. Do stay.